Hello everybody, my name is Henry Tenby. Welcome to this edition of Model Moment. And in this episode, we're going to be featuring this wonderful Western Airlines Boeing 720. It is a Pacific Miniatures model. It dates from probably around 1970. And we're going to be looking at a very, very interesting model that I consider to be quite rare and unique. But before we do that, I'd like to provide a bit of history on the Boeing 720, and I will use my favorite book on the Boeing Airplane Company. This is a Funkin Wagnall's book. It's very similar to Putnam. It's a production from 1968, and it details all the Boeing aircraft since 1916. And I'm going to read you the section from the Boeing 720 in which we explain what the 720 was all about. So the 720, the model 720, was developed as a short to medium range version of the 707-100, and it was used for operating on shorter runways, and it was originally called a 707 when they first developed it. So while little change was outwardly noticeable, the redesign was extensive, and it justified the use of a new model number, and hence Boeing used the 720 designation. So while using many of the same 707 structural items and systems, the 707 is very different. The 720 is lighter, it's 9 feet shorter, so that's a lot of weight in fuselage heft that wasn't there. And it is also redesigned in the wing section, particularly from the inboard number 2 and number 3 engines to the fuselage, where there was a tapered wing glove. So that was very different on the 720 as well. So the 720 was either powered by JT3 engines, which were the really first generation pure jet, smoky and thirsty, fuel-thirsty engines, or they upgraded a few years after the aircraft was introduced in about 1962 with the JT3. So the aircraft was used for shorter haul runs, and it was designed specifically for the US domestic market. And a number of airlines ordered them, including Ethiopian, Eastern Airlines, Braniff, Lufthansa, Pakistan International, and of course Western Airlines ordered a total of 22 720-047Bs. 047 was Boeing's designator for Western Airlines, and it was a B model 720 because of the uprated engines. So it was a 720-047B, and Boeing delivered these 22 aircraft between about 1962 and 1967. And another 2 720s were also delivered to Pacific Northern Airlines in Alaska. They took delivery of N720 Victor and N720 Whiskey, which were used on their Seattle runs up to Alaska. And Western Airlines purchased a PNA in about 1967, and thus they took over those two pure water wagon version 720s as well. So Western had 22 plus 2, it's about 24 720s in operation throughout the 1960s. And it was about 1978-79 that Western Airlines started to retire the 720s and 707s just because they were more fuel efficient and they had enough capacity with the 727s and 737s and the DC-10s. So Western sold their aircraft. I believe they were all gone by around 1980, and I know Middle East Airlines went on to operate a number of them, and there were other operators that took them on as well. But the 720 is a unique airplane. Only a few hundred of them were built. They served a unique purpose. In Western Airlines operations, the aircraft was operated primarily between the US West Coast and Honolulu. So Portland, Seattle, Los Angeles, San Francisco, these were points where Western operated to. And from Seattle, they went north up to Alaska with the 720s. And then from Portland, San Francisco, Los Angeles, they had quite a big business flying to Honolulu. So if you went to Hawaii in the 1970s, chances are you'd see a Western Airlines 707 on the ground. I'm not quite old enough to remember that myself, but from history I know that's where they operated. The 720s in the latter part of Western's operation, interestingly enough, also operated down a long-haul route across the United States into Miami, so that was kind of cool. But more frequently, they would be seen on Western's routes between Denver, Salt Lake City, Los Angeles, and across the Pacific over to Hawaii. This particular model that we're looking at is a 1/60th one-piece fiberglass production by Pacific Miniatures. Now, Pacific Miniatures was rebranded as Pacmin, perhaps in the 1980s, but they are a huge supplier of models to primarily the airlines, but also to the U.S. military-industrial complex. And their models are well known going back well into the 1950s. If you're a collector of travel agent models, you might be interested in reading more about Pacific Miniatures. And my book, which I wrote about this subject, is called The Aircraft Display Model Collector, Investor, and Appraisal Guide. And I do have a whole chapter dedicated to Pacific Miniatures and their beautiful models. And as you can see, I even illustrate a World Airways 707 that I had in my collection. And that is a beautiful model. So yeah, you can read all about Pacific Miniatures. The book is available on my website, henrytenby.com, and you're welcome to check it out. And of course, you can, if you're interested in this topic, you'd be well served by owning a copy of my book. So this model is about 28 inches nose to tail with about a 27-inch span, which makes it a very big and hefty model. And the lines on the model are really accurate, and look at that. Look at that nice wing dihedral there. It's just beautiful. I'm going to tilt the model up so you can get an indication of your leading edges here. As you can see, there's your wing glove from here to here. It tapers forward on both sides, and that was a unique feature of the Boeing 720, the inboard leading edge wing gloves. 720 also had a high frequency antenna on the tail. On this particular model, it's unfortunately broken away some time ago. But a model builder could Dremel out that hole and put a wire in there and resimulate that antenna without too much difficulty. I'm not sure I'm going to do that, but it is certainly within the realm of possibilities. So this model's in great condition for its age. I would estimate this model to date from 1970. And why is that? Well, the model is not a refinished model. It was painted in this color scheme by Pacmin back when this color scheme was introduced. So prior to this, most of us will know that Western Airlines had the old Indian head, the Indian Chief color scheme, where they had an Indian head with a pinstriping of cheat line flowing back. And this was a more modern 1970s look that was introduced in about 1970. And this model was produced for that occasion, I believe. So what's cool about this model, we have a registration right there, N93141. I wonder if that's the very first 720. It might be. Some of you might be able to comment on that if you are knowledgeable of which was the first 720 to be delivered to Western Airlines. And rotating the model around, it's big, it's hefty, takes up a lot of space. So these models, the big 707s, will have sometimes damage just because of their very nature of taking up a lot of space. And this model is unfortunately no exception. But again, it presents beautifully. It's a lovely model. But we do have right here a small strike that could be touched up with some silver paint. And we do have on our number 4 engine pylon a small crack. The engine is sound. That's just a strike of some nature which caused a stress crack. And on this side, on the port side, our engines are actually in pretty decent shape, although we have some engine nacelle inlet damage right there, a chip. Yeah, these things happen, but overall the model's in really quite impeccable shape. It's got a little bit of yellowing on it. That could be because the model sat in a boardroom and the chief executives and board members were were powering through stogies with their drinks and talking up a storm, and some yellowing could have ensued from that, perhaps. And we'll just give you a bit of a tour around the model. For those of you that are interested in some Boeing 707, 720 trivia, how can you tell the difference very quickly if you're at an airport and you see a 707 or a 720? They're both short, so they have very similar body lengths. The wings look the same, the engines look the same. How can you very quickly tell the difference? Who knows? Well, I'll tell you how. Have a look here. The model is very accurate. We have a single emergency exit over wing on both sides. The 720, most 720s had that single door, the single emergency exit over wing exit. 707-138Bs, which were, again, roughly the same size of aircraft, looked the same externally. And the 707-138B was produced for Qantas as a long-range aircraft, and they actually were built with 2 overwing exits on both sides. So if it's got one emergency exit overwing, it's a 720 in most cases, or if it's got 2, it's for sure a 707-138B. Also, some of the shorter 707s built for American Airlines did not have your HF antennas as well. So that's another telltale sign. All 720s, as far as I'm aware, had the HF antennas. But yeah, the lines on this are really cool. They look great. And have a look at the underside here. We've got some interesting Western Airlines stuff. We've got a sticker right there with maybe a product number. We've got a Pacific Miniatures crest. And if we look on the underside here, we have the Pacific Miniatures crest, but we've also got a Western Airlines product inventory number there. So I guess they didn't want employees to just walk out of their headquarters with this model tucked under their arm. And by putting that sticker there, it ensured the model didn't stray. I don't know the exact pedigree of this model. I did acquire it from an antique seller collector here in Vancouver. And the presumption is this model was probably displayed in executive offices either here in Vancouver or in Calgary. Why so? Because Western Airlines operated these aircraft, the 720, into Vancouver up until, I guess, about the mid-1970s. And they also operated the 720 into Calgary, also through to about 1977, 1978, thereabout. So these airplanes did serve their time in Canada as well. So they mean something to us Canadians. But yeah, doing the walk around here, we see we've got our we've got the 2 doors, we've got the overwing exit. We don't have any baggage pits on this particular model, but again, the registration is very cool. In our last video, we presented a Pacific Western 737, which dated from delivery in 1968, and they had the CFPWD on that aircraft too, so that was very, very cool. And not often do they put the aircraft registrations on the aircraft. You tend to see it very infrequently, and more often than not, the registrations are left off. I guess airlines did, if there was an accident or they sold the airplane, they didn't want to tie the model to the aircraft and then have the models become surplus to their needs. So they just left registrations off in most cases. The nose looks good on this model. No damage there. The cockpit windows are all looking cool. Again, the yellowing on this model it's there, but definitely I would not mess with it. Some people might want to take a wet sand to the surface and try to remove the clear coat, but in my expertise, that isn't always successful, and you risk ruining the decals. And I think this model is in such nice condition, you just want to leave it as it is and enjoy it in its natural beauty. As she presents here. And yeah, look at those lines. You could just, imagine that thing taking off, trailing smoke behind her. Wow. Very, very cool. And yeah, she's a bit of a heavy model, weighs several pounds. In terms of rarity, the 707 is definitely a more common model in the 1/60th scale by Pacific Miniatures. Why is that? Because there were more 707s existing and delivered to the airlines than there were 720s. And I guess airlines that operated both types. In most cases, probably preferred to emphasize the 707 over the 720 just because it was a more widely known aircraft, and making models of the lesser known aircraft probably didn't make sense to most airlines. I can tell you that I have seen United Airlines 720 models. I've seen, of course, this Western. This is a model that is kind of a specialty just because they're so rare. And I would say the values on these are probably $200, $300, $400 more than your comparable 707 models. The 707 models were made for many airlines: American, TWA, Braniff, Western, of course, World Airways, I guess Flying Tigers. Almost every U.S. carrier probably had Pacific Miniatures back in the day, produced 707 models for them. But it wasn't the case with all of Boeing's 720 airline customers. So you just don't see them. How many of these models actually survived is a question that nobody knows the answer to, because we just don't see these very frequently showing up. So what is the value? Hard to say. In my opinion, I think that this model is probably worth a good several $100s. The 707 without yellowing in great shape could be worth that, depending on the livery. Some of the more common U.S. airline liveries in the 1/60th scale, as I've explained in other videos, tend not to fetch the long dollar. They're kind of like in the $400 or $500 range. But the 720 is a different beast. So if you're interested, I have actually got this model listed on eBay right now. You can check the link in the description below. You can actually look at the auction and consider placing a bid. I listed the model with a $995 opening price. I think it's worth maybe $1,200 just because of its rarity. And we'll know when the auction ends next week what it's actually worth, because that will represent the market value. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm out to lunch, but maybe I'm right. Who knows? But the model's there. If you're interested, it's $995. You can actually place a bid and win this auction for $995 or not. Who knows? If the auction doesn't get any bids, I may change my mind and take it off the market. So it's rare that I do that, but I have other models that are in my outlook, and this is a model I might consider selling. So there you go. And this model is quite large. As I say, she's about 28 inches long, 27 inches wide, so it's fairly costly to ship these models. Typically, it's going to be a couple $100s to ship this model by UPS Ground anywhere in North America because of her heft. So that's just the cost of ownership and transport in these models. The model is mounted on her original base. This is your standard walnut base that Pacific Miniatures developed in the late 1960s. You frequently see it on Pacific Miniature models. And have a look. We've got decals on the wing surfaces showing the spoiler and flap positions. Same here, and on the tail. So the stabs have the decals. There's that little strike I was telling you about as well, unfortunately. There's actually a phone number here on the bottom, 802-560. No, it says 802 Southwest 6th Street. 802 Southwest 6th Street. I wonder if that's in Calgary. So maybe I wonder if this model originated in Calgary. Who knows? Or it could be in the States. There could be a Salt Lake City address with that information. Very possible. So there you have it. She's a nice looking model. I hope you've enjoyed this video presentation. As a reminder, there is a subscribe button in the lower right-hand corner. Please click it. That way you'll get a notification of any time I am releasing a new video, and you'll be able to join and watch and chat live as we present the video. So do subscribe to our channel if you haven't already done so. And if you do enjoy my videos, in particular this video, I'd appreciate a good solid thumbs up. That would be awesome. And what else can I say? If you have any models that you'd like to buy, sell, or trade, I'm always a cash buyer. So don't hesitate to get in touch with me and let me know what models you might have for trade or for sale. I'd love to hear from you. And of course, if you have comments about the Western Airlines Boeing 720 or this model in particular, please do leave the comments below, and I'll look forward to responding to each and every comment that is posted. So thank you very much for tuning in. It's been a great pleasure. I hope you've enjoyed this beautiful Boeing, and I will look forward to seeing you on the next edition of Model Moment.